This is Cody McLean from the Mindhack podcast, a place where we explore the routines, mindset, and experiences of successful people in their field, whatever that field may be. Today, we're interviewing somebody who is incredibly focused, driven, and ambitious from an early age. He's a self-described polyglot who can speak 5 languages, and he's also in the top echelons of the Oracle marketing department, serving as a digital marketing manager who oversees an annual budget of $210 million. He has a significant influence in Oracle's marketing, and no doubt due to his drive to succeed and get shit done. Besides managing a budget that is larger than the revenue of most of the world's companies, he's also launched his own unique startup called Univoice, which combines our love and taste for music with language learning. And he hopes that it will make it easier for millions to pick up language at a much faster rate. His name is Sami Halabi, and he's one of the smartest people I've had the pleasure of interviewing. He's had a myriad of achievements in managing sales and marketing teams for companies that have gone on to have tremendous growth. His current team at Oracle is ranked as the top 1 of 8 most productive North American software sales organizations. In this episode, Sami shares his thoughts on marketing, managing a team of people, what it means to be happy and productive, but most of all, the science of learning language. And, well, how to get out there, overcome your fears of rejection, to get advice from the top people of your industry, and much, much more. This is a fast-paced episode without much breathing, so you might want to scale back your playback speed because there's a ton to learn and think about from a very smart person. So give it up for Sami Halabi. Hi, Sami. Thank you for being on the Mindhack podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we started recording, you were talking a little bit about being a captor to time, but not letting time be a captor of you. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Absolutely. I think that this is kind of one of the golden rules of life, right? Is learn how to manage your schedule or your schedule will manage you. I think it's very relevant for everybody, especially in a society like the United States. It's so fast-paced to understand how to find peace and find kind of identity in the mix of a crazy schedule, routine of not just your own business or whatever career you have going on, but also your self-management things like your health, your diet, your exercise, how much you sleep, how much water you're getting, how much sunlight you're getting a day, whatever it may be. It seems like an overwhelming task for us to know how to best use and manage our time and how to make it our greatest ally rather than an enemy.
Now, you're a digital marketing manager at Oracle. Now, you're also a polyglot, which I'm going to have to ask you what that means later. As far as I know, it means you know multiple languages, and you manage the highest marketing budget in all of Oracle. You work in a team of about 12 people, and you have a budget that you have a significant influence on of around $210 million a year. And on top of all that, you currently run a startup. Is all that correct?
That is correct. Many listening may think that's crazy, but that is the truth.
And so how the heck do you do that? How are you able to manage all these things and fit them into your schedule? Do you ever procrastinate?
Can I procrastinate is the question. Good question. I think I'll answer that with one word, and it's intentionality. I think the most important thing in life, period, is to be intentional with whatever you're doing. A lot of times people get into this kind of rut of doing something emptily formalistically because it's on your schedule. You have to do it. You have to check the box. But I'm really not a fan of that kind of mindset. I think that half of success is really just being present, being there, being engaged, being 100% into whatever you're doing. And then everything else will follow. Anything can be taught or learned. But as far as being intentional and being present, I don't think that's something that you can really teach as easily. It's more so a methodology or a way of life that you have to adopt given the size of your goals. Maybe if you really want to achieve a lot of things in life, I don't think you can do that without being intentional and without being fully present. So I think that's my greatest asset in being able to manage such a big schedule, is that no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I'm going to be fully committed to that activity. And then as far as how do I manage so many different moving parts with a team is the really easy answer. Whether it's my personal life, my team is my family, or it's my startup life, my team is my executives and then their respective departments, or even at Oracle where my team is other really brilliant and bright digital marketers and marketing and sales operations people who can assist with a slew of tasks. If you don't know how to just contribute part, but not become a task hog and take over too much, more than you can chew, then you can never manage such a versatile set of responsibilities, I guess you could say.
Now, I've been having that issue a lot. I'm somebody who likes to go into the weeds and work really, really hard on a project. But on the other hand, I have a company and I have my own team of assistants. And it's really difficult sometimes to know what tasks I should be assigning to them. Because at first, when I had a VA, it was amazing. I think, oh my God, I can outsource all these things that I've been doing myself on a regular basis. But then I found myself actually delegating tasks to them that require things like critical thinking, creativity, things that are only inherent to me. And then we would get into arguments and I thought they weren't doing very well. And I realized that a lot of the work that I fundamentally should be doing that makes me like my creative, my actual value, my skills, I was outsourcing to them. So how do you determine which tasks do you delegate to your team versus the ones that you actually decide to do?
I think you kind of answered that question in asking it, right? I think that it has a lot to do with if 10 people were given this task, what would the delta be in success, right? If the average 10 people, the 10 marketing practitioners or sales practitioners or developers, whatever it may be, were given this task, what would the median performance be? If it's something that has a really big delta, that's probably a good indicator that it's a specialized thing that only a couple of people may be good at in that group, or one person may be really good in that group. If it's something that you can assign to all of them, and from a scale of 0 to 100, it's only like a 5 to 10 margin of difference or delta of difference between those 10 people's performance for that task, then that's probably a good indicator that you can simply train somebody to do that.
Okay. Can you tell me quickly, what is a delta?
Delta is a difference, like the difference between.
Okay. Is it so it's not the average?
Right. So let's say that 10 people performed on a task and you're rating them from a 0 to 100% scale. 3 of them perform at 100%, 4 perform at a 70%, and then the final 3 perform at a 20%. The delta between the lowest and the highest performers is 80%.
Okay. Cool. So then can you describe how you work effectively within the team? Can you tell me how many other companies and teams have you worked in before? And what are your thoughts on the effectiveness of Oracle marketing departments and general, how they do things? Because I know that there's different methodologies of working within teams. And like the most popular one with developers is agile development, where you have sprints and there's a scrum master and all that stuff. Can you describe kind of how you guys work effectively as a team?
Would you like for me to speak more to the startup team or the Oracle team?
If whatever, I think Oracle would be an interesting one, but I'm most interested in what do you think is the most effective methodology within a team that makes them effective?
Sure. So I believe that the most effective methodology, and maybe I'll just merge the two between Oracle and my startup for different things, because in my startup, I'm involved in 10 different lines of business, and Oracle is just digital marketing and sales operations as well as sales. I just think in general, the most important thing is that you learn across the team, how can we distribute work to such a level where if we wanted to test something, we're not going to burden everybody on the team to do it. But what if we could kind of share responsibility in tackling an initiative or a new project that will require the minimal upfront requirement and effort for us to get at least a finger on the pulse of return of that activity or that project or initiative. So how can I do the least work now, get a project or initiative live, see the results preliminarily so that I can then understand how to manipulate or change course before doing a full-fledged program or initiative launch where everybody has a major amount of responsibility, only to then find out that no return yields at the end.
So that leads to my next question is sort of, do you ever lose motivation? And the example I give is that oftentimes I would want to have 5 different priorities. And like I want to build one company. I need to manage this team and have them get certain KPIs and metrics. But then the problem is I only make a little bit of progress on some of these projects, say on a daily basis. And in some ways, it feels like you're not actually making progress, and it can be easy to lose motivation versus, say, the other workflow methodology that I found is more effective is literally just picking one thing and say for that whole week or that sprint, like that's all I'm focusing on, despite all these other sort of maintenance responsibilities and other projects, is that I can only focus on one project because then I feel like at the end of the day, I'm actually making progress and it's easier to keep that flow going. What are your thoughts on that?
So I love that you said the 2 words in sequence that I'm going to answer your question with. One thing. One thing, if you have not yet, or any listener has not yet seen Brian Tracy's piece on the one thing, I think that is a requirement for anybody who's interested in self-development and adopting perspectives and methodologies of success. That methodology really goes to say that there are 1,000,001 things that you could do at any given point to improve your performance or your quality of life or your business's market share, whatever it may be. But all you are tasked with doing at any given point is identifying in each different sphere or realm or each different project involvement along the personal and professional divide. What is the one thing that if I were to do nothing else for each of these projects or involvements or personal investments, if I was to do nothing else other than this one thing this week, that I'm going to judge my success and my performance and my satisfaction and fulfillment as well on this one thing, what would it be? And that is all you focus on. You just focus on that thing. And there's nothing else, even if you miss sleep one day or you can't exercise that day or you whatever comes up in the way, or you don't finish a blog post that you meant to finish that week, it doesn't matter. There's 1,000,000 things that are left unfinished at all times. But if you were to just choose that one thing in each involvement, at the end of the week, you look back and you're like, I did accomplish that thing. Now what's the next thing? I think that using that as your North Star and your compass is probably the most important thing to keep motivation in any given involvement.
Now, is this something that you're just consciously aware of, or did you learn it through experience or reading books, or do you do any kind of meditation or reflection that has allowed you to know this and find an effective productivity workflow?
I think that we as humans kind of already know, like intuitively through experiences, the things that are in our best interest, and we just funnel through self-development content until we find something that hits such a chord that it creates a visceral response in your body. And you're like, oh my God, that's the thing that I never had a name for, but I've kind of been doing already. Then that fires you up because you're like, oh my gosh, there's alignment in what these other people are preaching who have millions of followers and what I've naturally, organically just come up with on my own. It's a really reassuring and motivating thing, which is why and I think many people consume self-development content, because then you're starting to see which of your internal and kind of natural proclivities and inclinations that just spontaneously generated from your experience are in alignment with the teachings of people who have millions of followers, because it kind of gives you that ego boost a little bit. You're like, oh yeah, I thought of something that is now consumed regularly by millions of people across the world. And that's kind of how I would describe it. My different methodologies for organization, success, productivity, time management, etc., are all things that I feel like are organically contrived, but then have been reaffirmed by different self-development coaches or gurus or whatever it may be. So that's my short, long answer.
And that's pretty good. Do you have any productivity books or other concepts like, say, David Allen's Getting Things Done? Anything that speaks to you that comes to mind?
Any manager in the world needs to read 100 Ways to Motivate Others by Steve Chandler. He also has a book that's called 100 Ways to Motivate Yourself. And I think both are great reads. Since I'm personally more vested in management and managing others and empowering others to then empower others, create that ripple effect of change, I am more interested in the 100 Ways to Motivate Others. But it's so bite-sized that you could read, tip 76, and the next day you could read tip 3 and tip 15. Like nothing would there would be no contingency between the different tips. So
Mhm.
you can just kind of scroll through the table of contents, a 2-page table of contents, the 100 rows of the different tips and their titles. And you can just see whatever speaks to you at that time and what you think you really need to work on. And then once again, focus on that one thing at a time. And once you've made that thing a habit, or once it's become secondhand nature, then that's when you can move on to something else to improve on.
Nice. It reminds me a little bit about my weekly habit of checking my Evernote Kindle highlights. So I will have the Kindle highlights that I make automatically synced into Evernote. And then once a week, my task is I will open up that Evernote notebook and I'll see all the various books in the notes. And I'll ask myself, what is the current problem or issue or like digression that I've been going through in my life? And then I try and find a book that's relevant to that. And I'll read the highlights for that. And it's amazing because it's like pinpoint advice for the problems that I'm currently going through in that phase, because we don't always read the right book at the right time in our lives. Sometimes we need back to that information.
Absolutely. I think that self-development is such a journey of its own time, because there's different things that will speak to you at different times based on when you come across them and what life experiences you're going through at that period of time. So I agree with you. I think it's really good to kind of keep a repository and to look back and just scan the titles and speak, oh, this speaks to me right now. I need to improve on this.
Now, you said as well in the form that you filled out that the magnitude of your success and your speed to attain it are directly tied to the size of your asks and the depth of your conviction. That seems like a pretty deep statement. Can you elaborate?
Yes. So let's translate it to layman's terms. How quickly you become successful and how deeply you become successful is directly tied to how bold you are and how convicted you are. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I maybe can connect it to personal relevance. I feel like most people in life, just in general, like they kind of stand on the sidelines and they want to follow rules. They want to respect organizational structure. They want to respect hierarchy. They want to respect the boundaries of their own role. Well, coming from an immigrant family, from one of the most civilly distraught countries in the world right now, in Syria, you don't really get anywhere in life by standing in line. And I believe in this concept wholeheartedly, that if you want to be the best, associate yourself with the best. Ask for things from the best early on. Add value to the best so that they can then keep you in mind and you can become a thing of importance to them. One really good example is, as I started this company, a lot of Univoice, my company, which I haven't really stated the purpose of yet, so I'll just give a quick blurb on it. It's the first mobile app that teaches languages through music. When I first started this concept, I went to the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer of Duolingo, who is in her late 20s and now in her early 30s, and scaled Duolingo's growth rate up to 300 million users within 5 years from just several hundred thousand, and spoke to her and had a preliminary conversation with her via email. And then I've connected with other people who are really big wigs in this space and, asked for their time, asked for their input and their advice. And that's kind of what I mean. But the size of my ask, I didn't go to just any business coach or any marketing expert. I went to the person who was leading the market. And I'm like, hey, let's have a chat. I'm really curious to pick your brain. I really want to know more about your success and how you've gotten to the place where you've risen to today. Another person I've connected to, director of business growth and analytics at Smule, which is the number one most popular karaoke app, several hundreds of millions in valuations today. Same thing. I talked to him. He was managing a multi-million-dollar monthly marketing budget, and it's really big time. So it's really good to just go and ask big from people who are big, rather than playing it low key or laying on the sidelines and trying to tread lightly as if you're walking on eggshells all the time, because no disruptive growth, either on a personal or professional level, will ever happen if you tread lightly and the size of your asks are small. And then on the front of conviction, just believe in it, believe in what you're doing, and the rest will fall into place. Believe in what you're trying to serve and who you're trying to serve and impact. And the rest is very quick to follow.
Right. We're motivated by having a meaning, a purpose. And there's a story of this janitor who was working at NASA in the 60s, and John F. Kennedy was visiting, and he asked this janitor, "What do you do here?" And the janitor replied, I'm helping put people on the moon. And, that's such a far-flung answer from what you would have expected him to say. And it derives from having a meaning that's not tied to his paycheck or any bonus. It's finding something within the company that he's doing, helping people, essentially, providing a service that makes or improves the lives of other people.
Absolutely. I love that so much. I mean, whenever somebody asks you what you're doing, you can easily fall into the rut of saying the same functional answer every time, or you can just kind of say your more soft skill oriented goal at the time, who you're trying to impact, how you're impacting them, what you're getting out of the experience to then help you go and start your own company one day or start your consultancy practice or whatever it may be, rather than being like, oh, I'm a salesperson at SAP, or I'm a salesperson at Oracle or at MongoDB or whatever, right? That's just a very rote answer to something that you could answer a lot more intentionally, once again, to bring that word up.
Now, I want to move on to your startup a little bit and then get into how you're basically working this job at Oracle and then having a startup at the same time. But I want to touch on something else before we leave that. And it comes back to something you said earlier about managing others and delegating tasks. So one of the problems I've always had as an entrepreneur is I will start up a company, and at the beginning, I have to do all the work myself. I'm doing the marketing, the customer support, the registration, the legal, everything. And then at some point, I'm able to hire other people to do other things. And then it can be difficult to figure out exactly what my focus should be, and as well as what time I should be hiring, say, a chief operating officer or a president or another executive to help handle these responsibilities. Because as you grow in the startup world, you as a founder, you have all the responsibilities, but you have to at some point know when you have the money, the resources, and the energy expenditure on, say, this area of the business that could be defined within any of the executive functions that are typical in an organization, when you should hire somebody to do that or promote from within. And that was one of the biggest issues I had, is always trying to prioritize and reanalyze what are the current needs of my business and where should I be focusing my time? And is this thing no longer worth doing? Should I hire somebody to do it for me? So Sure. Interested if you have any thoughts on that.
It would be concerning if I didn't have thoughts on that. Absolutely. So I think what's most critical is starting with an end goal. Not to sound cliche, but you really need to understand where do you want to end up and when, and then you can kind of backpedal from there and understand when you need to hire when and for what. I'll give you our example, right? At Univoice, we want to hit the market at the end of the year, end of September, beginning of October, because seasonally, language learning apps are most successful during the Christmas and Thanksgiving holidays. So we want to hit that end of year, kind of money-making time, and have a 4-month marketing push, because that's really on average how long you should really hit the market contiguously when you're a new product to start gaining the proper brand awareness and footing and brand recognition, et cetera. So if that is the goal, and I have a year and a half until I get there, right, at the time of making this goal, then what do I need to do now to move this needle that much closer toward that goal? And you can continue to iterate and change things as time goes on, manipulate however you need to. But it becomes pretty clear whenever you create that end goal and then you set milestone goals for that year and a half leading into that, and understand really from a practicality standpoint, okay, so if my first milestone of 10, it's going to happen in a month and a half from now, and it requires that I have a website, and it requires that I have 100 users or 100 potential users that can participate in focus group. And it requires that I'm incorporated and I have my articles of incorporation in place and I'm starting my due diligence for funding and whatever, right? Be like, okay, so if I were to chunk this into weekly items for the next month and a half, what can I actually do? And also, what am I good at doing in sequence, so that you can understand what your unique value add is going to be? Because of course, you're going to take some of that responsibility on your own rather than delegate everything. And then what do I need to hire for, contract out for? Usually start with contracts, of course, third parties. And then that's kind of how you'll identify when you need to hire for what. I think what's most important is anytime you hire somebody that's first in their function, so the first marketer, the first finance person, the first tech person, I know it's hard to find them sometimes, but you really do need to find somebody who's both a functional expert and has management experience. Because remember that they are going to end up becoming your directors or your VPs of those departments. And sure, it doesn't mean that that's going to be the case every time. The way you will be most effective. Yeah.
Do you know when you should, say, promote from within versus hiring externally for an executive position?
So at the beginning, I guess there is no within, right? At the very beginning, for the first 6 months, because everyone is just like the only person in their function. And then they're working with third-party agencies or, you know, working with contractors under them to get functional work done for their line of business. But I think the point at which you need to start deciding from promoting an executive is when you have 2 or 3 functional people in one area, whether they're contracted or full-time employees. It's probably a good time for you to hire a level of middle management between you and them. Of course, there's naturally going to be a team lead. I think that's going to rise to the occasion within a functional group of 3 or 4 people, let's say, in a line of business. And that's usually going to be the logical person to promote into a director position, let's say, if they're all functionally like managers of the function at that time. And I think it's all dependent on, is somebody stepping up to the occasion or not? If there isn't, or if somebody is stepping up to the occasion, but you don't believe in their ability to lead at that time, you have to understand, do I have the bandwidth right now to coach them or to hire an executive coach to train them and fill in that gap? If you don't believe that you do have the resources, or believe that if you even brought the resource that it would end up working out in your favor, then you're probably going to have to hire a person to lead that function externally.
Yeah, there's definitely no like right way for everybody. It can be different based on your situation.
I agree.
So to talk about your startup and how you manage a job at Oracle, I would like to ask how you do that, but I'd also like for you to give me a little bit about your past. You mentioned growing up in Syria. I don't know if you grew up there, but how did you get from Syria? And then I know you have like honors degrees out everything, and you are in a great position at a very big tech company. You have a job that a lot of people would loathe to have. And you also are running a really interesting, unique, fascinating startup. And it's very rare that I run into somebody on the street, which, you know, we're mutual friends of my CEO, Connor, from my other company, Support Ninja. Is really rare for somebody to show me their app idea and for me to actually be impressed, because I have seen so many app ideas. I've been to conventions where they have everybody pitching all their apps, and yet it is so rare for me to run into something that is still at the very beginning phase, but for the idea to be so original and so unique. So I'm actually going to say, let's skip to that and actually go into, where did you get the idea for Univoice from?
Sure. Yeah. And then I'll also mention what you alluded to, the polyglot thing, and define that for people in case people don't know what that means. So it all started with me being a polyglot and a musician. Like I mentioned earlier, Univoice is a mobile app that combines the 2 things that I'm most in love with in this world, which are languages and music, into one, and basically use one to teach the other, using music to teach language. I was raised in a trilingual household. Part of my life I was raised in Syria, and then part in the United States, and back and forth. Really, we would move back and forth. I'm a dual citizen of the 2 countries. And I think one of the things I'm most grateful for, purely grateful for in my life, is that my parents really prioritized retaining our cultural heritage rather than becoming fully Americanized and dropping it. And so I was raised in a trilingual household, speaking Arabic, French, because of our Lebanese, Syrian roots, and English. And I ended up losing French, unfortunately. When I was in 2nd grade, I replaced that with Spanish all the way through high school. And then I taught myself German, starting in high school for a year and a half, junior year through senior year. And then in university, I took a few German classes, and then I moved to Germany for half a year to teach about human rights to kids from the ages of 8 to 18 in German. And so that experience was one of the most motivating things for me to pursue more of the educational element around languages, because I started teaching languages for 2 years after that experience in Germany. And I'd returned to the States. I did it virtually mostly. And yeah, so the experience with those 5 languages, now I'm working on Italian and music. Ever since I was 6, I've also been in music, played piano from 7 to 18 with a couple of year gaps in between, and have been in vocal performance as well since I was like 6 or 7.
Were you always this motivated to create new skills and learn new stuff? Or where did that come from?
I think it mostly came from having an immigrant father that just has a very scrappy mentality. If nobody's read the book Immigrant Edge yet for Brian Buffini. I highly recommend it. It talks about the 7 key traits that differentiates an immigrant in terms of success and why 90% of millionaires in the United States are first-generation Americans. And it's kind of funny that not to get too political, but we're trying to now kick out the people who are the millionaires in our country and make us successful. That's really intuitive, right? In any case, I think it's just the immigrant edge that he had. He's always just been so scrappy and hungry and curious and just pushing the bill on everything. I mean, he's almost 60 years old now, and he's doing multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deals and owns restaurants, and he's still kicking very strongly. So he's been a really strong influence throughout my life for so many things. And my mother has too, like the kindness, compassion, love, and rooting everything in your life in those things, some of the soft skill side of things. But my dad has just always been this like gung-ho, like let's get ish done kind of person. And so I really think that I took after him in terms of always wanting to be involved in something and fearing boredom to the extent that if I lay down for 15 minutes, I start to go crazy.
So tell me about Univoice and where that came into play.
Sure. So Univoice came into play about starting July of last year. So it actually has been an exact year. It all started when I met a venture capital leader for Mercury Fund, which is an Austin, Houston, Dallas-based venture capital fund, at a networking session here downtown in ATX. And he was asking me what I do. I told him I'm a digital marketing manager and I teach languages on the side. He's like, okay, that's cool. What about the languages thing? It's like, yeah, I teach online. I have a couple students in person. He's like, well, what makes you different as a teacher? I was like, well, damn, okay. That is a question. I was like, well, I think what makes me different as a teacher is my methodology of teaching and what I really use to teach. I use a lot of songs in the classroom. And he was like, like songs to teach languages? I'm like, yeah, I've been doing that for a while. And I was just actually starting up a German Instagram page, which got like 3,000 followers in 2 weeks when I started posting content of me taking Disney instrumental tracks and then creating German grammar jingles and singing them over the Disney tracks. And that gained a certain level of virality. And so I feel like, oh, okay. Yeah, dots are starting to connect. So this guy's asked me why I'm unique. I teach languages through music very heavily, along other things in the classroom. I have been getting a lot of really positive attention from people really liking learning German through music. So, and he was like, yeah, I mean, have you thought about like scaling that into like a business of some sort? I'm like, what, like a business, like an app that teaches languages through songs? He's like, yep, that's what I mean. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a really good idea. And he's like, yeah, it is. He's like, I mean, it is. And he's like, honestly, I have seen so many different companies in my life and I see 10 pitches a week. He's like, and honestly, this has potential. This has legs that can stand on and it has a place in the market. And I'm like, yeah, I agree. So that's how it started.
So then can you tell me about the psychology behind your app? What makes it different? Would you say it's better than Duolingo? Because I have gone through the entire Duolingo course for Spanish. I also had Spanish in high school. And now even my assistant, Hannah, who's fantastic, she is also a Spanish tutor. And so I have weekly sessions with her on that. But I know one of the things that she said is that all of her students, they will go through Duolingo. And yet when they get on with her, they will barely be able to speak any Spanish. And I've had the same issue trying to speak Spanish verbally versus I know when I see text on Duolingo and it's asking me to translate that text, I know what to say. But it's really difficult to translate that into an actual conversation with another human being. So I'm interested in knowing why that is so difficult and what your take is on Duolingo and any of the other methods to learn language and what Univoice does differently.
Okay, so I'm going to geek out on you here. Are you ready for it?
Okay, I'm prepared.
You have just opened a Pandora's box because I've been invested in this space my entire life. And this is really what I can speak to most comfortably of any topic of why does something like a song just work when things like vocabulary banks or grammar, just example sentences, etc., that's just really presented and delivered in a dry way doesn't stick as much. I'm going to hit on there's two buckets, I guess you could say, that I like to bucket our differentiators. And the second one is physiology. But first, I'll start off with more of the linguistics and kind of like neurological theory around, as well as educational methodologies around why using music to teach language is more effective than a Duolingo method or a Babbel or a Busuu method, which are really the market leaders. So number one is it's active, not passive learning, right? So many studies prove that learning by doing is more effective than learning by listening to a teacher or a trainer. Secondarily, music and memory. I don't know if you've really dug too deep into this, but why do you think we teach with nursery rhymes to children? Why do you think we create a jingle to remember things? Music and memory are so heavily intertwined. We use it from childhood all the way through adulthood, not because of happenstance, but because rhythm and melody are anchors that help us retain and recall learnings, and especially words. Another piece of this is the relational element of it, not rather than the random element of it. As you've probably gathered then from Duolingo, is this a lot of randomness? It seems like these sentences are randomly generated rather than relational, like our app is, because songs are at their core relational. It is a native individual expressing in their native language their ideas and their thoughts, usually about love or relationships or meaning or success or whatever the topic may be. And really, at the end of the day, songs are nothing more than relational pieces of poetry. They're the purest form of self-expression, and they teach you entire phrases that are already pre-baked that you could just copy and paste, and you can use to express both simple, complex feelings, thoughts, or ideas. It's also really backed by linguistic theory. So one of the biggest things in linguistics is called comprehensible output theory. And it's a leading language acquisition theory that posits that the more frequently a learner becomes aware of and corrects gaps in their knowledge, the quicker they'll acquire the new language. So of course, in a song, you're being exposed to the gaps in your knowledge much quicker than you are with just random sentences that are like 7 words maybe every 10 seconds versus 15 words every 4 seconds, like in a song.
It sounds a little similar to the Feynman technique of learning.
Yes, actually, they're connected.
Can you describe this technique and sort of the overall principle? Because the thing that I gather is that you build out a map of that knowledge area, and then you work within that, and then you try and bridge those gaps. But having that initial map is one of the biggest benefits as far as I understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Feynman technique really is, by its end goal, very similar to what the technique that I described is, because it helps you understand concepts that you don't really get or remember things that you've already learned, and to just study and consume things a little bit more efficiently. So they really do have a similar end goal. Of course, I'm more steeped in the comprehensible output theory, so I can speak more to that and maybe refine it a little bit. So think about if you are in a conversation with a native speaker. How overwhelmed do you get in comparison to when you're doing a Duolingo lesson?
I get so anxiety ridden that really all I can say is hola, ¿cómo está? Bien. Y tú? Adios, hasta luego. And the problem, I've brought this up with my tutor, Hannah, is feeling like when I'm in a conversation, I literally don't know what to say. Like, I feel like I have to go and look up a webpage, small talk questions to ask in a conversation. And that anxiety has basically prevented me from even really trying to initiate conversations with others, particularly in Spanish, which is the one I've been trying to learn. And I just feel like I can't, and then I don't, and then I don't learn. But maybe that's just my experience.
No, it's not just your experience. So what comprehensible output theory is the very reason that you are ending up feeling that level of defeat, because in this model, you're ideally just to be exposed to certain failures or certain shortcomings in your knowledge for the language. But when you're exposed to too many shortcomings, that is actually very demoralizing. That's why it's really helpful to learn in a more contained environment where you're not required to respond, right? The thing that is so scary is when you have to respond, not when you're just consuming content. So our app is a really good way for you to steep yourself into what a native conversation is going to be more like, because let's be honest, Duolingo pronunciation is much more classroom than it is real life.
Well, and there's things like I was going to mention earlier, that one of the sentences it gave me earlier today when I was doing it is, Jose works at 2 libraries. And it's just interesting the way that they structure the sentences. They're definitely not sentences that you would have in everyday conversation.
That's the random versus relational piece. Absolutely. I think what's also, just because, we could probably spend 10 hours talking about this. I think another really powerful element to consider is the physiological component of language learning. So your brain and music and language is tied together in your brain. It's actually the same compartment, the same receptacle, which is why when you learn an instrument and you become proficient in an instrument, you're actually far more likely to become proficient in another language because it is training the same part of your brain, essentially. And a lot of people don't know that music connects the two hemispheres of your brain. So that's why people who are both musically and linguistically inclined have much greater spatial skills or critical thinking or reasoning skills, also concentration ability to focus, things like that. Your improved brain functioning, basically, as well as the ability to make better predictions when you are more proficient in both music and languages. So we are giving you 2 in 1. You are becoming proficient in 2 things at once.
Can you tell me how it works, how your app allows you to learn language and music? Because I think I've looked at it. I remember the time that you showed it to me that it plays the song in Spanish or, I mean, whatever language that you select. But how do I remember that? And how do I take those words from listening to that song?
Absolutely. So the way that it works is you'll go into the app and you'll select the language that you want to learn and then the play mode. So there's a few different play modes, which I'll elaborate in a second. Then once you click, let's say Spanish is the song you're trying to learn that language in. And then you click English is your native language. So that's your origin language. Then you will see a list of genres. Say you're feeling reggaeton that day or salsa or pop or whatever. You'll click on that genre of interest and you'll see a pre-selected song list in that genre. So let's say you picked a reggaeton under Spanish. You could come across one of the songs that we have, which is Tu Culpa, means your fault, for Victor de Brija. Once you click on that song, you will see a, once again, pre-populated list of test lines from that song that are in Spanish, since of course the lyrics of that song are in Spanish, and then directly translated into English. So you'll see each line translated. Then you can play those test lines since you're going to soon be tested on them pronunciation-wise once you click ready to begin and start the song. You can play each of those lines and become familiar with how the native way of saying that line is, what the translation is. You can get familiar with the tempo of the song, etc. And then once you click ready to begin, you'll go through that entire song. And then you will have to repeat, depending on play mode, with the artist or after the artist, the line in your best pronunciation possible. You don't have to be a singer as long as you're focusing on pronunciation. And then you'll get, depending on play mode, either immediate feedback or feedback at the end of the song with the words that you pronounce correctly in green and the words that you pronounce incorrectly output in red.
So you play the song and then I have to remember the lyrics and then you're recording my singing into the app and then it plays that back to me. Is that correct?
So instead of playing back your voice, it's not going to play back your voice, but it's going to output in a speech-to-text model what you said. It's going to transcribe what it heard you say. Mm-hmm. And then if there's alignment in what you said, aka positive pronunciation, with the original lyrics, it'll turn green, that word that's output from your speech. And then if you say it incorrectly, there's poor pronunciation, then it will be output in red. And you'll get a final score at the end based on your relative overall pronunciation for those test lines throughout the song.
Yeah. And again, it's so brilliant. I remember when I was growing up in LA, we had this one friend is that he would be able to remember songs in the entire lyrics just in like one passing. And it was just this unique gift that he seemingly had where he always knew the lyrics for every song that came on the radio. And for me, I've never been able to do that, but we all are able to, on Spotify, there's a playlist that's Sing in the Shower because we're all able to remember those songs and maybe not all the lyrics within a song, but the main chorus, we typically remember those. So to combine that within language learning, I think is brilliant. And so my next question goes into, have you done any studies? Like what is the psychology that shows that something like this is more effective than having a 30-minute conversation a week with a tutor? How more effective is it than Duolingo? What's the psychology behind this?
Absolutely. So to answer it first, buyer beware. Let me start off with that. Anybody who tries to convince you that language learning is focused on one single method is lying to you. There is no such thing as one method that is the best. There is such thing as methods that are more effective than others and work very well as a supplement to other methods, but you will never become fluent with any single method other than maybe just pure conversation, trial and error. But even then, you really do have to have a knack for it, or you're going to give up early because of how ashamed you'll feel for how little you know. But yeah, it is just a supplemental game where there's a lot of collaboration in the industry. I feel like there's no such thing as market share in the e-language learning space. It's like everybody has all the apps if they're interested in learning a language, right? But to speak to the efficacy, we are doing 2 major efficacy studies right now. One is with Dr. Veslanov and Dr. Grego, who are 2 PhDs in economics and statistics. And they've kind of become the industry leaders for doing efficacy studies for language learning apps. They've done one for Duolingo, Pimsleur, Rosetta Stone, Busuu, Italki, every single leader in the industry, basically. And then their work has been published then in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. So some really good publicity for those apps as well. And even Duolingo to this day, like their first thing on their homepage is like 2012 Duolingo efficacy study with Dr. Grego and Veslanov. So needless to say, that's going to be a really good revealing moment once that study's finished. The second thing that we're doing is we're actually doing a Learn Language Through Music and Friendships class that's going to be hosted by a university professor from the University of Tijuana, who has 20 years of experience, language teaching experience in Spanish. And he is going to teach a class of 25 to 30 students, I believe, in Tijuana on the border. And it's going to be exclusively focused on learning through songs as well as friendships. So they're going to go and meet local artisans and people who are creating different artifacts or sewing clothing or whatever it may be.
So on a more, anecdotal perspective, do you have any friends or people who've used the app that have achieved certain results and given you feedback? And if so, kind of what's been their feedback? Like how long did it take them, et cetera?
Absolutely. I think the thing that I've heard most commonly is the song just getting stuck in my head. I'm like, that's the point. The point is that the song is stuck in your head. And then furthermore, that you're going to learn the meaning of the words in your head. I can't tell you how many times through the various languages that I've known, and I have learned languages through music. Yes, I actually became conversational in German, mostly thanks to music. I'm speaking to somebody in German and these words just come to your mind. They just surface at the top of your mind and you're like, hello, where did you come from? Well, they came from a place of anchored learning where those learnings became cemented because you learn them in song. And it's just so much more easily recallable than remembering page 75 in your Spanish or German textbook. You're probably not going to remember that. But I just think there's a way from the feedback that I've heard and the experience that I've had myself with this app. It's just, it gets those things stuck in your head and now you know the meaning rather than just having a random foreign word that keeps on coming back up in your mind.
Yeah, and that's similar to an interview I did with Nelson Dellis, who was the author of a book called Remember It, which in many ways was a more skillful look at the memory world and how anybody with an average brain can remember vast amounts of information. And his primary tip came back to the idea of having a visualization or connecting information together. And that's how you remember something. And I think this falls very nicely within that you can remember a song because each chorus and lyric kind of connects to the next piece. So yeah, I am very much interested in trying it out. So if there's a new user who wants to use your app and they're currently learning language. So myself, my current commitment is I have 30 minutes a week with a tutor, and then I'll do just basically one Duolingo session a day, although I feel pretty bad about that because it's not very much. But if you were to give advice to somebody on how they should learn language, what do you suggest they do? Do you still recommend Duolingo? Should I be using your apps 10 minutes a day? Have a tutor? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I think a really important thing is to segment your learning into 2 different buckets. So there's the foundational aspect of language learning, and then there's the relational aspect of language learning. So the foundational piece is you do need to know the praxis. I mean, you need to know the structures, the conjugations, the tenses, the cases, the kind of the grammatical foundations, or you're just going to forever be like winging it, I guess you could say, which people who are more relationally inclined and more linguistically inclined may be able to pick up on just learning through conversations with people, much like people who learn from muscle memory to play an instrument rather than learning how to read music. It's kind of a very similar thing. But if you ever want to become a masterful pianist, you have to know how to play by ear and sight read. You can't just learn how to play by ear and call it a day.
Mhm.
So as far as the foundational piece goes, I think the most effective thing you can do, investment you can make, both time and money wise, is a tutor. Definitely vet the tutor. I really suggest that you ask every single tutor, whether it's in person or virtual, to have a 30-minute free session with them, which I always offered, of course, as a language instructor. Just ask for that trial period to be like, hey, I just want to test out, different tutors and see who I work best with, who I connect best with, both on an interpersonal level as well as an educational style level. And then once you find a good tutor, I would say the relational piece, where you need to be aggregating a big vocabulary base and, seeing conjugations in action, seeing cases in action, things like that. I really recommend two things on that front. It's first, music, really. Music, you could do it through my app. You could do it through just listening to songs on YouTube and turning the subtitles on, whatever maybe. The app is effectively that in a much cleaner interface and tests your pronunciation, which is why it's, duly enforcing on the front of you acquiring new vocabulary, but also testing your pronunciation.
And so I'm going to ask you at the end of the show to provide a list of resources on language learning and other articles that I can include in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in learning more about language in general and where to start, there should be links in the show notes for that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I do have to say, though, is have a conversation partner. Hello Talk is great. Hello Talk, 2 words, so simple. 10 million language learners globally. You say what language you speak, what language you want to learn, and you'll have, boom, filtered buddies around the world who are ready to speak to you in their language and learn yours. So,
yeah, I've looked at that and I haven't tried it, but I feel like I should.
It's good. I really recommend it. Once you have a foundation that's strong enough to at least have a beginner conversation in the language.
So then jumping gears a little bit to basically your startup, where are you? Are you making any money? Do you have like a lot of user growth? Where do you hope to be? Kind of what's been your journey, if you could summarize your journey as a startup founder?
Absolutely. So in the past year, I feel like we've done a lot. And that's what we hear time and time again from everybody who I come across. They're like, wow, can't believe you accomplished this much in just 1 year. We are at a point where we have about a team of 25 contractors, including 4 full-time. And we are raising our third and final round of seed to take us through October, which is when we're raising our Series A. So we've had 2 separate angels invest first and second round. So gaining some traction on that front. As far as content acquisition goes, licensing music for use in our app, we just came back from a really big conference called Mindhack, which is the biggest music business conference in the world, where all music owners of all sizes, music publishers as well as record labels, go there to strike business deals like these. We struck a lot of business deals, got tons of music cleared, and are now working with 3 of the top 20 biggest music owners, both publishers and labels in the world. So we're really excited that we're getting some traction on that front. We have about 630 users today. We're seeing some really good engagement rates. We're seeing about 10% of people are spending 10 to 30 plus minutes each session, and about 20% of people are spending 3 to 10 minutes. So we're really lucky to be seeing that about 1 in 3 users are spending an ample amount of time each session in our app. And we are really hopeful to see what's next, of course. Keep in mind that we really are between beta and market ready product. So within the next couple of months before, of course, we do our big marketing push end of year, we're going to have a much better and cleaner and more user intuitive product. But of course, it works today. No questions asked, and you can use it today. But that's just something to keep in mind.
What was it like to initially have the idea and then want to create it? Where are you a developer? How much money did you invest in it? Was it scary at all where you had to ask, is this really something I'm going to do? What was that thought process? Did you have an anxiety about creating the app, or were you just so excited that you were just I'm going to throw money at this thing and make it work?
Excited at first and doubtful. I mean, I think that doubt is always present in every founder and every executive who deals with this level of an operation. But I think at the end of the day, you got to keep your eyes focused on the goal of where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get out of all of this. And I hate to say this, but if your goal is a little bit more selfish, there's a selfish reason for starting your business and wanting it to scale, you're still going to end up impacting a lot of people along the way. So even if your goal is not impact, find a goal that is real for you, that you're well, this is really what I want. don't lie to yourself about it. Don't be like, I want to create world peace. If you don't want to create world peace, that's fine. You're not a monster, but just know it's going to drive you and keep at that. And yeah, my personal money, I've invested about 50,000 to date over the last year. And yeah, I mean, I expected to invest that much money of my own. And I think whenever you're trying to see something get off the ground, you are just in such a go, go, go mode that you don't sit down and think, is this a logical financial investment? No, you're like, we have a $3,000 billable invoice right now. And so we need to pay it. And I need to pay it with this money because that's what I have right now. So it's just that scrappy kind of startup mind that you have to adopt.
And one of the answers that you gave in the form that you filled out for the episode is that you mentioned that you shouldn't go into uncharted territory until you consult with somebody who's mastered that territory. Although the search can be arduous, there's always at least one person who has been there. And I guess for you, that was Duolingo. And then the other person that you mentioned who you reached out to, right? And you were able to get their perspective on the idea.
Yes. So I mean this even less so in a niche way of like, if you want to create Airbnb, go find the closest person who has Airbnb and then talk to them. That's not necessarily what that advice was alluding to. It's more so it's pointing to the fact that if there is anything that you don't know how to do in a business, there are a lot of people around you who know how to do it. So don't like fumble through and try to figure out, how do I create an integrated digital marketing plan? Hello, go talk to somebody who's created an integrated digital marketing plan. That's really important. That you're not just trying to like figure things out as you go, although there is going to be a level of that, but at least have guidance and direction from somebody who's mastered that space or at least has a good foundation in that space. And that could be for anything in your business.
And it's also having the confidence to actually even reach out to somebody like that. I wrote this blog post on my website about how I pitched to the CEO of $1 billion company. And that was just basically me pitching my company's support ninja to the CEO of Upwork. And he responded to previous questions. And so I thought I'd write a blog post about it. But I think it goes back to the point of a lot of people don't feel like they have the confidence or, I'm just a little tiny pea in the pod. And why would this huge CEO of this multi-million-dollar company reply to my email? But it's just a matter of reaching out, getting over that initial doubt that we have about like they're never going to respond in a million years. Just give it a chance. Just try and see what happens. And in the case of Support Ninja, there was actually our closest competitor, TaskUs. I was afraid to reach out to Bryce, who's the founder of that company, and they're much bigger than we are. And I thought, they're our competitors.
They're gonna eat us.
And I was able to be introduced by a friend and found out that Bryce was a great guy. And he's been honestly helping us ever since. Like he even helped give us the contract that we use for our client agreements. And that's one of the most difficult things in my view of actually trying to run an outsourcing company is having like an actual agreement for your...
I really need to comment on that because I just think that's such conversation gold. What you just said, I've been in sales for 5 years prior to this whole marketing thing and starting my own company and teaching languages. And I'm just going to tell you something. Okay. I've run deals with even like C-levels at headquarters at BMW in Munich in the United States and talked to the C-levels at Pepsi and talked to C-levels at every Fortune 100 company. And I'll just tell you a very simple fact in life. If somebody is resistant to speak to you at any given point in time, it's a factor of usually their character more than it is the power or their rank or title. Okay, like the idea of being collaborative or innovative, that person who's a C-level now at Pepsi, if they did not want to talk, if they don't want to talk to you now, sure, they may be busy, but busyness aside, if they're just not willing to give you the time of day, they probably weren't either when they were an analyst at a low level in a company. That doesn't have anything to do with how important and powerful they are today. That has everything to do with how they are archetypally as a person. So just remove title, remove rank, remove seniority from the equation. People are people. There are those that are helpful and collaborative, and there are others who are isolationist and crass. And that's just how they're going to be forever, regardless of where they are and what they're doing. So never let a failed outreach attempt, request, hunger to even just listen to somebody who's a thought leader, speak for 15 minutes aimlessly. Never let their rejection define you. It only defines them. And so you can continue reaching out to whoever the hell you want, however the hell you want, for whatever you want at any point in time. Try to not be extractive all the time. Try to, be supportive and kind and open in your approach and understanding, and be a good person as you're reaching out and see if there's anything that you can add value in their lives. And the question is worth a principle, not even the outcome, right? And then really you're good to go. You can ask anybody. So just never let anybody's response define your future attempts to get any kind of information or help.
Yeah, and that even ties to sales. Like if you're trying to do outreach and you're cold calling and you just keep getting people hanging up on you, or you're trying to validate an idea as a startup founder and people aren't really giving you what you want, is it can be really easy to be demotivated by just getting a handful of rejections in a row. Even the same thing goes along with being a startup founder pitching to an investor. Then I guess the question is, one way of staying motivated is to actually set goals. And so you just tell yourself that, you're going to call 10 people and then you're going to see, was it a success or not? So even if you're getting those first few rejections, you're still able to have a little bit of a North Star and look at that goal that you set for yourself, that minimum goal.
Absolutely. And that's what is going to, define your confidence when you're reaching out, because you're like, okay, I have this goal. I'm going to reach out to 100 people. They said no, they said F you, they said move on. Fine. I'm still going to hit my goal. So somebody's going to say yes along the way. And that's why your North Star needs to be that, rather than the rejection or acceptance of your offer.
So we're getting into the last few minutes of the podcast. I don't want to make it more than 90 minutes. And there was one last thing I want to touch on a little bit is it seems like mental health has been a big part of your life. And I know that you mentioned that you have family members who have mental health issues. And honestly, probably anybody who's listening probably at least knows somebody that has a variety of mental health issues, whether that's anxiety, which I know I definitely suffer from, ADHD or bipolar or anything like that. Curious if I were to just say, go and speak about that, what you would want to say.
Absolutely. So just to keep it as short as possible, I think one of the biggest things that we lose sight of is, number one, everybody is struggling to an extent with some level of depression or anxiety or ADHD or whatever it is, because we're humans and that's the human condition. It is so important that when you have a massive workload, especially a massive burden on your shoulders, whether that's just your personal life, you're just dealing with so many things that are you're feeling insurmountable, or from a professional standpoint, you being part of a company full time and you're starting your own business, or just your own business is taking your life over, or your corporate job is taking your life over. Just remember that no victory is sweet if you can't taste the sweetness. And what I mean by that, for the analogy of tasting sweetness, if you're not in the right mental place to accept a success or to accept victory, then there's not really much of a point to it. You have to be in a clear, sharp mental state at all times because of how you're managing your health and your life, and taking breaks, meaningful breaks, 30-minute, hour breaks, not just 5 minutes, taking a walk, going outside, going and watching a show that you really like, trying to do as many active things rather than passive things as possible when you do have some downtime, and connecting with people and seeing your best friends and talking to your family often, if that's your thing. Like whatever it may be, just take that time for yourself. Take at least a half day or a full day off a week if you can't do any more than that. And just have a couple hours every single day where you're just being kind to yourself, whether through break time or doing an activity that you enjoy or connecting with people that you love. And I think that is the easiest thing to lose sight of when you're running a business, but it's also the most important thing in life. So that's the sad part of it, is we lose sight of so many important things while we're trying to make something grow, but the growth is not going to be felt in a positive way if you're not taking care of yourself first. So just keep that in mind, no matter what challenge or set of unique responsibilities, tasks, hardships you have on your plate. Just make sure that you are taking time for yourself and remembering that nothing is more important than your happiness and your fulfillment in life. So prioritize it.
Yeah, I was actually just listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast, and Naval Ravikant, who's the founder of AngelList, and just recall what he was saying, that happiness is a choice. It's something that you can choose to do at this very moment. And I've used the example of, you've never heard of a depressed CEO creating a multi-million-dollar company, because you have to be happy before you exert the effort and utilize the willpower needed to create something of success that you can then look back on and be proud of. And the idea that you need this or you need that to be happy is obviously just a story that you're telling yourself, a false narrative that can be hard to correct, though, because even though when you know that, this object's not going to make you happy, it can still be obviously something that you want. And I guess for me, the way I view it is, I'm getting a new condo soon, and I don't want to imagine myself necessarily I know it's not going to make me happier. I know that there's going to be a period where, it's great and I love it, and then that obviously goes back down to the
dwindles, yeah.
Before. And so I still want it, and it won't prevent me from necessarily buying nice things, but I try and remind myself that it's only going to give me a short burst of happiness, but I can choose to be happy now. And that's been a big theme in my life.
Yes, please never pursue a material thing as the means for your happiness, because it never is going to be. You are either happy now or you're not happy now. So you make the decision, like you said.
Sami, it's been amazing to have this conversation with you. I'd love to have you on again. So thank you. You've had some wise words on life, success, learning, and everything in between. So thank you for your kind words and wise words.
And thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome being on. And yeah, I'd love to come back sometime too.
Okay. Hey guys, this is Cody again. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Mindhack. And if you're interested in getting more Mindhack-worthy stuff straight to your inbox, then you might consider signing up for my weekly newsletter. It often contains links to new episodes, blog posts, and other interesting finds I found on the interweb in the past week. It pretty much focuses around productivity and efficiency. So if that's your thing, then be sure to visit my website at codymclain.com. That's MCLAIN.com to sign up. Also, if there are any interesting websites, companies, books, blog posts, quotes, or anything else that was mentioned in this episode, you can find it all and more by visiting the official website for the Mindhack Show at mindhack.com. And as always, if you have any feedback, good or bad, I want to hear it. Send me a tweet, email, or what have you on either of my websites, as my goal with this show is to give you the maximum value in the shortest amount of time. That's all for now, guys. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you guys again soon.